It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. Donald Trump is threatening to investigate Beyonce, Oprah, and Bruce Springsteen because they hurt his feelings by not supporting him. That's what this boils down to, a petty tyrant throwing a tantrum because he feels like the cool kids were mean to him. But all joking aside, this is how a would-be autocrat goes about suppressing dissent. It's an old playbook. Pick a handful of high-profile critics to threaten, and then make an example of them to intimidate others, especially those who lack the resources to fight back. This is part of a much broader strategy of intimidation. So much of Trump's bullying seems reflexive and random, but there is a certain instinctive cunning that he brings to bear in conflicts like this, and often enough, his bullying tactics work. Just look at how he has brought the Republican Party to heel. But we can't give in. We have to support those who are speaking out, and we have to continue speaking out ourselves, because that's how you take down a bully, by not backing down. I spoke about all this with former Fox News host Julie Roginsky, now a Democratic strategist and fellow superfan of Bruce Springsteen. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Julie Roginsky, who is a Democratic political strategist who spent years in the lion's den at Fox News. Welcome back, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to get your take on the ramped up attacks on basic freedom of speech. I mean, I just found out you're a Jersey girl, and the attacks on the boss, Bruce Springsteen, probably hit you even harder than they hit me. I grew up with the boss and born in the USA. And look, he's going to be fine. As you mentioned in your Substack, he's going to be able to hire the best lawyers, but it has a chilling effect on everybody. It creates this climate of fear. And when you look at autocratic regimes, we just had Ruth Ben-Ghiat on. She's incredible, talking about like the rise of tyranny and autocracy. So much of it is just a vibe shift. It's a feeling of fear and people censoring themselves.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Second, I will just say to anybody who thinks about coming for Bruce Springsteen, you're coming for all 9 million of people, the residents of New Jersey. And so, we kind of fight tough and we don't fight fair because we don't have our own media markets. We get away with a lot of sketchy stuff. If you watch The Sopranos, that a lot of other people don't, who do not come for the boss, unless you want to come for the whole Garden State. I say that as somebody safely sitting in New York City right now. But look, you're absolutely right that Bruce Springsteen sold his catalog for $500 million a few years ago. He's got all the money in the world to deal with whatever Trump throws his way. So does Oprah, who Trump decided to come for in the middle of the night. So does Bono. So does Beyonce, and so on. I mean, Trump decided he was going to go for the full gamut of American icons, not to mention Taylor Swift. So it's an interesting ploy. But all those people will be fine, regardless of what he does. And I do believe that he is going to unleash the Justice Department or the IRS on them in some capacity to teach them a lesson, because if he can make an example of a Bruce Springsteen or an Oprah or a Taylor Swift, it's easy to either A, shut the rest of us up because we will have seen what he's powerful enough to do, and it will be easier to come after people who don't have the resources that Bruce Springsteen has or Oprah has. And so just based on that alone, what I think is going to happen is there are going to be a lot of well-meaning people who are going to say, you know what, maybe I just won't tweet what I really want to tweet today. Or maybe I'm not going to go on social media or post on Facebook a picture of, some orange clown and compare him to Donald Trump. Maybe I'm just going to sit this one out. Not because I don't care, but because I'm a little scared. And I don't really need the hassle. I don't need the headache. I just want to go on with my life. That's how it begins. And I know Ruth Ben-Ghiat is a authoritarian expert. I grew up in the Soviet Union until I was 7 years old. So I'm kind of a Jersey girl, but I actually was born and grew up in Moscow. And my parents were dissidents, which is how we ended up here. And I can tell you, having grown up around my grandparents, who were born in 1912 and 1915 respectively, and so therefore were around for all of Stalin's purges. My great-grandfather was shot on Stalin's personal orders. My other grandfather spent a decade in the Gulag. Having conversations with them And they didn't talk about it much in the same way that veterans who came back from World War II didn't talk much about the war. They didn't really talk much about the 30s in the Soviet Union. But from what I could put together, and from talking to my parents who were born after that, obviously, is that people were so afraid that they not only didn't talk about it publicly, they wouldn't talk about it to each other because denunciations happened everywhere. Children would denounce parents, spouses would denounce the other spouse, people who had an axe to grind against you would denounce you for something you never said. So you kind of had to be extra nice to everybody just in case. And so much so that you wouldn't even lift an eyebrow because the wrong facial expression would get you to a point where you could be executed or sent to the gulag for the rest of your life. And so I say that because it's not a coincidence that Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia as his first visit. He went to a country where the leader whom he professed to love was responsible for dismembering with a chainsaw a reporter who wrote something negative about him. And it's not a coincidence that Donald Trump, on his way back from the Middle East, having been surrounded by people who treat dissidents that way, started tweeting about Bruce Springsteen or truthing, whatever his social media thing is called. Again, because Bruce Springsteen had the temerity to say what he said about Donald Trump in Manchester, England, while Trump was in Saudi, or he was in Qatar. I don't remember exactly where he was on Wednesday when this happened. But again, what's so relevant about this is Trump, in Trump's head, he was hanging out with Mohammed bin Salman and thinking, why can't I do to dissidents? Maybe not dismember them, maybe he won't go that far, but why can't I shut them up in the way that these autocratic rulers are able to? I'm more powerful than they are, and yet I can't do that, and they can. Yeah. Let me see if I can get away with it. And so it's not a coincidence that that's when he started tweeting about Bruce Springsteen.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Huge shout out to everyone who has supported this show via our Patreon page. If you want to weigh in with questions for upcoming guests or give us feedback on past guests or make sure you never miss an episode, click the link below. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks a month, just know that we put every dollar back into the show. We do have another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up. Thanks for the help. I don't want to draw the parallel too closely, but your evocation of 1930s Soviet Union and me thinking about Trump's attack on creators and artists, it highlights this reality that it is art that almost inevitably is the first truth teller. It's not the business community. It's not even the media. They are simply reporting. It is artists who turn out to have the most courage when standing up to autocrats. That was true in the 30s in the Soviet Union. I think it's bearing out the same in America today with Springsteen and others telling the truth through stories.
It's always artists and it's always academics first, because they're the ones who are most creative and could think most critically. That's always the case. The business community typically, as it did in 1930s Germany, and I don't want to draw that parallel too closely either, but the business community tends to fall in line, right? The business community is about to get a massive tax break if this big, beautiful bill actually goes through. So that part I'm not overly interested in because they will fall in line. They always do. You saw exactly what happened in Trump's inauguration, who was sitting in the first row. Some of the very people who said they were done with him after January 6th suddenly are sitting in the first row. What I find a little disappointing is that Bruce Springsteen is 75 years old and he's the one who spoke up.
Right.
The most powerful artist right now in the world by far is Taylor Swift. Now, Trump is out to slam her because she very tepidly endorsed Kamala Harris before the election, but not really, right? And she hasn't spoken up about what's going on since. And I feel like there's this generation of millennial and Gen Z artists, the biggest ones, who are not saying what Bruce Springsteen is saying because somehow they think they can skate over it. And I'm here to say, my friends, it's not going to be possible. Because if you think about what happened in the Soviet Union, something called socialist realism was imposed, where all art all literature, all creativity had to comport with whatever Joseph Stalin woke up with that day and said was socialist realism to advance the cause and the revolution and communism. Nobody really understood what that was. And if you didn't understand what that was, or you didn't comport with whatever Stalin that day decided what it was, because it changed all the time, you'd be executed. That's it. You would just be executed. You didn't know why. You were doing your best. You were trying. You were keeping your mouth shut, or you were even trying to create art that comported with it, but it didn't happen. And so I think what people like Taylor Swift need to understand is you can't be on the sidelines. If you're Beyonce, you can't be on the sidelines. First of all, he's coming for you already because you had the temerity to endorse somebody else in the previous election. But even if you keep your mouth shut now, it doesn't matter. You only need to look at what's going on with Disney right now, where Trump is going out and just going crazy negative on Disney in the last couple of days and basically threatening them again. And this is after Disney bent the knee and settled, i.e. bribed him with a $15 million gift to his presidential library to settle a lawsuit that every single lawyer, I don't care what kind of law school you went to, knew was a completely nonsense, bogus lawsuit. But they thought that if they gave him $15 million, they'd be able to get away with whatever, they get on his good side. There is no getting on his good side. And you only need to study autocracy, and Ruth Ben-Ghiat and others can say this because they're experts in this, but you only need to read history to understand the revolution eventually eats its own, always. And so, it is disappointing to me, though not surprising, that 75-year-old Bruce Springsteen, who came of age in the 1960s, who really exploded during the Vietnam War period in the 1970s, who wrote Born in the USA, which everybody thinks is a great American ballad, but in fact is a complete slam on the United States.
Yeah, it's a protest song.
As Born to Run is kind of a protest song against New Jersey. It's a great story about how the New Jersey legislature in the early 90s was about to adopt Born to Run as the state song until they actually read the lyrics and were like, that's rap, suicide rap. We got to get out while we're young. Strung out on cages on Highway 9, that's Route 9 in New Jersey. So they kind of understood this is a protest song a little bit about what life in New Jersey is like. It's not a surprise to me that Springsteen is doing that. But look, if Taylor Swift were somebody who did not get engaged politically at all, I would say fine. I'm not suggesting that she should do that now, but she has. I mean, she did get engaged in 2020. She got more tepidly engaged in 2024. Maybe now would be the time to stand up because nobody's got more influence than her. Nobody.
That was part one of my conversation with Julie Roginsky. Check out part two next week, where we talk about how Democrats need to commit themselves to holding the Trump administration accountable, both because the rule of law still matters and because it signals to decision makers around Trump that if and when they break the law, there will be a reckoning. And one more note, I am heading to Ukraine for the next couple weeks, so audience favorite Bobby Jones, a fellow Navy vet, will be stepping up for a couple episodes. Also, keep an eye out on the Midas Touch and Valor Media Network social media channels for my reports from Ukraine. Thanks, everyone.